It's good timing that I'm here today to talk about global warming, because the good news for those of you from Manitoba is that today your esteemed Premier, Gary Doer, announced a 4-year, $145 million program to make sure that Manitoba lives up to Canada's Kyoto commitments. So he's now talking about huge taxes on energy producers, which of course will be filtered down to home heating bills and other prices around the province, as he tries fatuously to reduce emissions by nearly a quarter over the next 4 years, as though that were in the power of any politician to do, and particularly a provincial politician. But the very good news for Manitobans here this evening is that Manitoba is going to be, as part of this program, the first province to authorize the Zen on Manitoba streets. The Zen is a all-electric car made in Toronto, which looks very much like a beer fridge tipped on its side. I believe it is made entirely out of aluminum foil, but I'm not sure. It is going to be approved in Manitoba, despite the fact that it has never once been crash tested. And here's the especially good news, if you get behind one. The manufacturer claims that its top speed is 40 kilometers. Imagine your favorite stretch of 2-lane highway in Manitoba as a Zen putters along at the outrageous speed of 32 kilometers an hour, whining like crazy as it hits top end, and about 20 kilometers out of town stops completely because it's run out of battery. Welcome to the insanity that is being perpetrated on the developed world in particular in the name of saving the planet from global warming. Green is the new red. The locus of socialist thinking, of central planning advocacy in the world, moved from the economic sphere to the environmental sphere after it became difficult even for sociology professors to continue to advocate the Soviet system as the be-all and end-all. The feeling among some people that they need to control everyone else's lifestyles, to decide what other people should and should not do in their homes, in their cars, in their businesses, did not go away when it was proven that socialism as an economic theory was bust. That impetus stayed out there and eventually started to gravitate around the environmental movement. I think that for an awful lot of environmental advocates, and even for a good number of climate scientists, the attraction of global warming is that it permits them to argue for greater government regulation again, arguments that they haven't been able to make for 15 years on the economic side, they're now able to make in the name of saving the planet. I think global warming, though, is the next Y2K. I think it's like the overpopulation scares of the 70s and the 80s, which have proven to be false. We were told in the 70s and 80s that the Earth would run out of resources by the late 70s, and by the early 80s there would be massive famines around the world. But of course the entrepreneurial instinct overcame the limitations of the world's food supply. Innovations were found because there was money to be made in innovation to help people grow more crops, better crops, on the same amount of land with less water, fewer fertilizers, all sorts of innovations that took place that made the doomsayers of the 70s look foolish. I think global warming is like Y2K in the population bomb. I think it's like the BSE scare. I think it's like bird flu pandemic. It's interesting that the bird flu scare only really caught on in the mainstream press in the last 2 winters. In fact, this past winter, we didn't hear much about it. We heard a ton about it the previous winter. There had been a doctor at Health Canada who had been warning against a flu pandemic, like the swine flu infection in 1918, 1919 that killed millions, 20 million people probably, worldwide. There had been a doctor at Health Canada who had been warning against the pandemic every year in December since 1998. I guess on the theory that if you do it every year until one happens, you're going to look like a genius when one finally does come along. But all of this, particularly global warming, puts me in mind of one of my favorite H.L. Mencken quotations, and that is that the whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins, all of them imaginary. Now, I don't think people who support the global warming theory, or as it is increasingly being called, the climate change theory, actually sit down in a room somewhere and say, yeah, you know, this is all bogus, but we got people on the run now, and there's millions in research, billions in research grants coming in, and tens of billions in alternate energy investment coming in, and we all have great research jobs at universities, or we have emerging companies that are selling carbon credits. Basically, they're selling the air from one company to another. So let's not blow it by telling people. I don't really think that there is that kind of conspiracy that goes on. I think we are dealing here with something worse. We're dealing here with the true believer, the zealot, the person who believes they have morality on their side. And trust me, that kind of person is much more difficult to defeat than the conspirator. Eventually, the conspirator, you uncover what he or she's been doing, and they scurry back onto the rock from which they came. The true believer, the more you uncover what they're doing, the louder they are as they stand on that rock and tell you that they're right. I want to start off with one particular example, and I apologize if some of what I'm going to do this evening seems more like a lecture than a speech. But the science behind the global warming theory is the key to the whole issue. Government after government has given up making the scientific argument against the global warming theory. The federal government did it. The Alberta provincial government did it. They did it under Ralph Klein about 5 or 6 years ago. The federal government under Stephen Harper refuses to make the scientific arguments against global warming. They say, yes, the climate's changing, and yes, man's causing it, but we don't like the solution of the environmentalists. Trust me, when you're making a moral argument, if you concede the morality at the start, you lose the fight.